بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا من فضلك علما. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to this presentation from Zaytuna College. Just before Ramadan, we are preparing ourselves for Ramadan and for the beautiful days and nights of Ramadan. And welcome from all of us here in Berkeley, California. Today's session is about the Fiqh of Zakah in the Shafi'i school. Before I begin, I'd like to encourage everyone to listen to Imam Tahir Anwar, who did the Fiqh of Zakah on Friday in the Hanafi school, as well as Dr. Abdullah Ali, who did the Fiqh of Zakah in the Maliki school yesterday on Saturday. I did listen to both of them and I benefited from both of them. So I would encourage everyone to if you have the time, to take a few minutes and listen to what they had to say. Today's session we will talk about the Fiqh of Zakah, and today's session will have three parts. Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 will be mainly like an overview and a tutorial to talk about Zakah, its meanings, the wisdom behind it, the benefits behind Zakah, and to talk about the 8 categories of deserving recipients. And in Part 2, we'll delve into the detailed rulings of some of the zakatable assets. And in Part 3, we'll entertain the questions and answers. So in Part 1, we will go over the meaning of Zakah, both in the language as well as in the technical terms in Fiqh. We'll talk about the wisdom and benefits of Zakah. We'll talk about the cause and condition and impediment of Zakah. And we'll focus on the 8 categories of deserving recipients. Because there seems to be an overemphasis on the poor and needy, which are only 2 categories out of the 8. In Part 2, we'll talk about Zakah on property and Zakah on persons. Zakah is of 2 types. It can be on property, or it can be on bodies, on souls, on people, on persons. Zakah on persons is called Zakatul Fitr. It's due at the end of Ramadan. And if we have time, we'll go over it. And usually in the chapter on Zakah, the ulama also include every item that must be paid. So sometimes they include fidya, and they include kafara, and they include fay, and they include ghanima. And they also include voluntary charity, voluntary sadaqah. The word sadaqah and the word zakah are not easy to translate. So for the purpose of this session, I will probably use the word zakah most of the time and the word sadaqah when need be. And then we'll consider various examples and scenarios. In the third part, we'll entertain the questions and answers. Before we begin, let's look at some special vocabulary that we'll be using in this session today. First of all, the famous Nisab. The word Nisab is also when your property reaches a certain threshold, when your property reaches a certain amount, this amount is called the zakat payable amount. It's a minimal amount that requires you to pay zakat. We will see that Nisab is not required on everything. I will talk about it. Hawl. Hawl is a full Hijri lunar year. When we say zakah is due every year, we don't mean solar year. We mean lunar year, and we mean the Hijri lunar year. And the Hijri lunar year is about 354 days, 0.367, which is about 340 days and 8 hours. So every 354 days and 8 hours, if you have a nisab that you were able to maintain for the full lunar year, zakah becomes due. And automatically, the 8 categories become partners with you, i.e., at the end of the year, you do not own 100%. You own only 97.5%. And the 2.5% is owned by your partners. It just happens that this 2.5% is still in your pocket, but it does not belong to you anymore. It belongs to them. It's their property. We'll see that Hawl or lunar year only applies to livestock, money, and trade goods. It does not apply to other forms of zakah. So some forms of zakah requires a full year, and some forms of zakah is due immediately, like zakah on crops, zakah on mines, zakah on treasure troves, and the like. We will also see this term muawada. Muawada means an exchange. We will need this term when we talk about business goods and trade goods. So trade goods that are obtained through a form of exchange, whether the exchange is potential or actual, is called muawada. Usually when we talk about zakah and the 8 categories of zakah, the first question that comes to mind is, what does it mean to be poor? What does it mean to be wealthy? What does it mean to be able to take care of what one needs? What is sufficiency? If you look at the United Nations, the level of poverty in the last few years, it's been changing every year, but in the last few years, it was determined to be, you are poor if you make about $1 a day. And in some areas, if you make $1.50 a day. In some other areas, maybe if you make $2 a day. So if you make $700 per year, you are considered to be poor. This is an average internationally. In Berkeley here, if you make $60,000, you're considered to be poor. You have to make over 60,000 to go above the level of poverty. In Islam, when we talk about poverty and being wealthy, zakah is due on those who have wealth and property. Now, wealth and property can vary. So the Sharia put or assigned a number, and that number determines whether zakah is due on you or not. However, we will see that in the Shafi'i school looks at zakah top-down approach. Their approach is top-down. And we will consider 2 scenarios. One scenario is that zakah funds are abundant. Every Muslim is paying zakah. Every Muslim that needs to pay zakah is fulfilling the obligation of paying zakah. We will also take a look at the scenario where zakah funds are not abundant, i.e., those who are supposed to pay zakah, they're not paying zakah. Maybe 10%, 20%, 30% of them are paying zakah. If zakah funds are abundant, we will see, inshallah, that zakah is an amazing system. You may wonder, why is it that zakah is a pillar of Islam? It's 2.5%. It varies between 2.5% and 20%, depending on the zakatable asset. But why is it the pillar of Islam? Because it affects 8 layers of society. And those 8 layers of society, there are sub-layers beyond these 8 layers. We will see, inshallah, when we examine the 8 categories of deserving recipients, how these layers and sub-layers of society get impacted and can benefit from zakah. There's also a misunderstanding that zakah is only paid to the poor and needy, and that is not true. You may be wealthy and you may be eligible to receive zakah. You don't have to be poor and needy. Poor and needy are only 2 categories out of the 8. So what does it mean to be poor? What does it mean to be wealthy? We will revisit these numbers or these concepts during the session, inshallah. Before we continue, let's take a hypothetical scenario where let's say that 1 million people are Muslims, as you know, is about 1.5 billion to 1.7 billion people across the globe. And most likely 15%, 20% of them can be donors of zakah, can be payers of zakahs. Let's take 1 million of those. Usually 80% of those millions, their zakah is around $500 per year. 20% or 15% is around $1,000. Maybe 2 to 5% are around $5,000 per year, depending on their income and their property and their wealth. And 1%, maybe around $10,000, and 0.1%, which are the extremely wealthy percentage of society, their zakah could be anywhere between 25,000 to 250,000, or even more. So on average, hypothetically, 1 million people with $1,000 zakah on average is $1 billion. And if we have 200 million Muslims paying zakah, on average, we could have $200 billion of zakah every year. Imagine how many problems in society these $200 billion can resolve among the 8 categories and among the various layers of society. Just imagine. Hopefully, inshallah, as the Muslim community matures, hopefully they'll inshallah, hopefully it will come a point, we will get to a point where the leaders in our community tries to understand zakah at a deeper level. And hopefully we get to a point where we can implement it as it should be implemented. So as you know, zakah is one of the pillars of Islam. It's an obligation for every free Muslim who has possessed the Nisab for 1 lunar year. It's one of the 10 ways of halal ownership. Zakah is related to ownership, and zakah is related to a transfer of ownership. Ownership must be transferred from you to the 8 categories. And the ways for halal ownership in the Sharia are about 10. Zakah is one of them. A gift is another one. If I give you a gift or you give me a gift, that's halal. Inheritance is a third one. Buying and selling is a fourth one. And so on and so forth. Working, employment is the fifth one. So there are about 10 ways of halal ownership. One of them is zakah. And zakah was legislated in the 2nd year of Hijrah. There are many verses that talk about zakah. One of them is a verse that I've shown here in Surah At-Tawbah, chapter 9, verse 103. خُذْ, i.e., O Prophet, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُطَهِّرُهُمْ وتزكيهم بها وصل عليهم إن صلاتك سكن لهم والله سميع عليم. O Prophet, take zakah out of their property to cleanse and purify them and to make it grow, and pray for them. Your prayer will be a comfort to them. And Allah is all hearing, all knowing. Let's take a look at the meaning of zakah in the language, as well as the meaning of zakah in fiqh, in legal terminology. In the language, zakah is connected with growth and purification. The growth can be tangible, can be physical, can be concrete, or can be non-tangible. The growth can be tangible, like we say, zakah al-malu, zakah al-zar'u, the growth of money, the growth of plants. They grow physically, we can see it. Sometimes zakah is connected with ziyadatul khayr, a growth and increase in goodness. We say, fulanun zakin, ay kasirul khayr. His goodness is abundant. And sometimes zakah is connected to blessings, i.e., this is the quality of zakah. Something that's very little maybe can suffice you for a long time. Why? Because it was blessed. It is also connected with purification, to purify, to cleanse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا, in Surah Al-Shams, chapter 91, verse 9. It says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. Truly, the one who purifies his soul has succeeded. The Mufassirun prefer that the subject of the verb zakah to be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not the person himself. They say, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا, i.e., truly the one whom Allah has assisted and provided success in purifying themselves are truly successful. Zakah could also mean praise. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran in chapter 53, Surah Al-Najm, verse 32, فَلَا تُزَكُّوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Do not praise yourself. Allah knows who is pious and who is not, who is good and who is not, who is a believer and who is not. But in the language, the ulama of the language told us that zakah, although it implies growth, it does not imply growth in quantity only. They say, the ulama of the language tells us that الزكاة معناها زيادة الشيء في ذاته مع جودة نوعه. It's an increase of something, let's say X, in both quantity and quality. That's what zakah means. In both quantity and quality. And it is called zakah because one's wealth grows through the blessings of giving it and the prayers of those who receive it. When we give zakah, there is an intention associated with zakah. And there is a prayer we say when we give zakah. And those who receive zakah, they also make a prayer. And through the prayers, our prayers and the prayers of those who receive it, zakah is called zakah because it's of one's wealth grows through the blessing of giving it and the prayers of those who receive it. And because it purifies its giver of sin and extols them by testifying to the genuineness of their faith. The Prophet ﷺ says, as-sadaqatu burhan, is a clear proof that of the genuineness of your faith. Because when a person gives sadaqah, he is giving something now in exchange for something that will happen in the hereafter. And for many people, the hereafter is non-existent. They don't believe in it. So if you give something that's tangible for something that's potential, it shows the genuineness and the sincerity of your faith. and your belief that whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide, you have more conviction of that than what is in your own hand. This is the meaning of zakah in the language. Technically, in fiqh, they define zakah as it indicates the name of a particular amount of property that must be paid to certain kinds of recipients under specific conditions. We will see some of them later on. Notice the word must be paid. Must means it's an obligation, it's obligatory. Paid means there's a transfer of ownership, implies. And the transfer of ownership is indicated in the ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah regarding zakah. So, zakah implies a particular amount of property that must be paid to certain kinds of recipients. So, not everyone, only specific types of recipients under specific conditions. And there is this concept of tamlik. Tamlik is ownership or a transfer of ownership. And the transfer of ownership can be qualified or unqualified. We will see among the 8 categories, 4 of them are unqualified and 4 of them are qualified. Qualified means that for some categories, although they receive zakah, it can be taken back from them. While some others, once you make a transfer of ownership, they keep it. Let's take a look at the wisdom and benefits of zakah. Zakah is being one of the pillars of Islam, is not there just for decoration. No, there is deep meaning behind zakah and deep wisdom and great benefits. We shall take a look at 4 of these benefits, and under each one, I'll only mention 1 or 2. So, zakah has devotional benefits. هناك حكم تعبدية، غايات تعبدية، وهناك حكم تربوية educational، وهناك حكم اجتماعية societal، وهناك حكم وفوائد اقتصادية economical. First of all, the benefits of zakat that are devotional, what comes to mind immediately that I'm paying zakah استجابة لأمر الله. I'm rushing to pay zakah for the purpose of obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to respond to the call of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it manifests my obedience. It manifests my ubudiyya, that I am a servant of Allah. And when He commands me to do something, I do it. Zakah also is a form of a devotional act, i.e., it manifests showing gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because gratitude, showing gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what we call shukrul mun'im, or what we call ibadah, to worship God. And also, it shows that there is a reward behind doing zakah, behind giving zakah. There is ajrun wa thawab. Zakah also has educational benefits. It develops good habit. It purifies and trains wealthy people who find it hard to part with their wealth. Many of us find it hard to part with their wealth, with their property. They can do anything, but to part with their wealth is not easy. There's a story among the ulama that one businessman he wants to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he finds it very hard to part with his wealth. So he used to tell his children, when the time of zakah comes, tie me and pay zakah on my behalf. Zakah is in this drawer. Why? Because he finds it hard to part with his wealth. So it helps us get rid of our stinginess, and it helps us develop good habits of giving all the time. On the other hand, in society, the 8 categories, the poor and needy, may feel envy and may feel hatred toward society in general, and toward those who are wealthy in particular. And they feel jealous of them. They might feel jealous of them. Why is he wealthy? Why are they wealthy and I'm poor? Why am I poor and they're wealthy? Zakah is legislated to alleviate this and to reduce this, and to purify society from enmity and from hatred and from envy and from jealousy. Because at the end of the day, the wealthy are working for the poor. And the poor and needy and the 8 categories are partners with the wealthy. The more money he makes, the 2.5% he pays is more. And I get more as a poor person. So instead of feeling envy and hatred towards them, I might feel that inshallah his money will increase so that his 2.5% will be more. So also it develops in us this good habit of qana'ah, of being content with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this world in a way that no 2 people are equal. There is always difference between people. Allah distributed the skills amongst people. He distributed the raw resources amongst nations. No 2 people are equal from all angles. I may be better than you from one angle. You may be better than me from a different angle. And we cooperate with one another. So this tafawut and level and difference in levels in society is something that's part of this world. In Jannah, it's different. In Hellfire, it's different. But in this world, people are different. And they have different roles. So this helps society to become close to one another and spreads, instead of hatred and enmity and jealousy, it will spread mawadda and mahabba. And strengthen the bonds among the layers of society. Because it's part of takaful as well. And finally, it has economical benefits. Because the wheel of productivity and the wheel of investment keeps on running all the time. So as we shall see also, zakah has connection with investment and has impact on productivity, and also has impact on wealth development, because as you pay zakah, your wealth grows through the blessings and through the prayers of others. So in summary, to have the honor to pay zakah and to be able to pay zakah and to have zakah in society will generate happiness amongst all layers of society. And not to pay zakah and not to have everyone who can be a payer of zakah pay zakah will affect society in all of its layers and will produce harm toward many layers in society. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned that he said, إِذَا أَعْطَيْتُمُ الزَّكَاةَ فَلَا تَنْسَوْا ثَوَابَهَا أَن تَقُولُوا اللَّهُمَّ اجْعَلْهَا مَغْنَمًا وَلَا تَجْعَلْهَا مَغْرَمًا. He said, when you give zakah, do not forget its reward. To pray, Allahumma ja'alha maghnama. Oh Allah, make it a gain for us. وَلَا تَجْعَلْهَا مَغْرَمًا, and do not make it a loss. And the hadith is narrated in two versions. إِذَا أَعْطَيْتُمْ وَإِذَا أُعْطِيتُمْ. إِذَا أَعْطَيْتُمْ, if you were to give. إِذَا أَعْطِيتُمْ, if you were to receive. If you were to give, make this dua. If you were the one on the other hand, on the receiving end, also make the same dua. Allahumma ij'alha maghnama wa la taj'alha maghrama. In another hadith, as narrated by Imam Tirmidhi, that the Prophet ﷺ says, if my community, there will come a time when my community, if they were to do 15 things, حل بها البلاء, calamity will befall upon my community. And then he mentioned, if there come a time and my community consider a trust to be a gain and zakah to be a loss. If we consider a trust to be a gain, if someone entrusts me with something, it's a trust, I cannot use it. But if I consider it to be a gain and I start using it, and I consider zakah to be a loss, not a gain, then things are upside down. And we are getting closer and closer to the day of judgment. And the Prophet ﷺ says, if my community does this, حل بها البلاء, calamity will befall upon it. Let's take a look at the 8 categories. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran himself specified the 8 categories. And we will notice 2 things here. In the Quran, it says, إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبِهِمْ. Zakah is meant only for the poor. So there is this word innama. Innama is an exclusive form. Zakah is restricted for these 8 categories only. But it's interesting that the lam is used. Innama sadaqatu lil fuqara'i. This lam is called lam al-tamlik. This is the lam of ownership. This is the lam of transfer of ownership. And 4 categories are preceded by this lam. And the other 4 categories, they have fee. Fee has a different connotation than the word lam, than the letter lam. Zakah is meant only for the poor, the needy, those who administer them, those whose hearts need winning over. وَفِي الرِّقَابِ وَالْغَارِمِينَ وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ. And to free slaves and captives, help those in debt, for Allah's cause, and for travelers in need. The last 4, the word fee is used, not the word lam. This is called tamlikun muqayyad. This is a transfer of ownership, but it's a qualified. i.e., if their situation changes, they return back what they've taken. Faridatan min Allah. This is ordained by Allah. Wallahu alimun hakim. Allah is all-knowing and wise. This is in Surah At-Tawbah, chapter 9, verse 60. Those are the 8 categories. In the next 10 to 15 minutes, we will want to focus a little bit and understand these 8 categories and see the layers of society that is impacted by zakah. And why zakah is a pillar of Islam. Not something else, not buying and selling, not giving someone a gift, not inheritance. Zakah is a pillar of Islam. إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم. So if you look at this chart, at this slide, the 8 categories, 4 of them, they have the letter lam precedes for the first 4. And fee is in the last 4. So we begin with the first one. The first one is called the Fakir. And under the Fakir and the Miskin between the schools of Islamic law, it's very interesting actually. The schools of Islamic law, the Shafi'i, the Maliki, the Hanbali, and the Hanafi. The Shafi'i took a top-down approach, and some other schools have taken a bottom-up approach, and some other schools have taken a sideway approach. And between the schools, the loop is closed. And I would advise all of us try to understand zakah in all the schools, not just the mechanics, but also the wisdom behind it, how they look at it, how the ulama thinks, how the Sharia made these ulama think in this particular way, through their deep analysis of the text that was revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The faqir and miskin, sometimes these two words are interchangeable depending on the school. In the Shafi'i school, they consider both of them to be poor and needy, but one of them is more poor than the other. In the Shafi'i school, the faqir is more in need. The miskin is less in need. In some other schools, it's the opposite. It doesn't matter. It means two categories are in need. One of them is more poor than the other. The faqir is called poor, i.e., they experience a deficit. They're always in deficit. But the faqir's deficit is more than 50% of what they need, i.e., they need 100%, they find 0% or 10% or 20% or 40%. Their property, their wealth, up until the end of their life, will always be in deficit. The miskin is a bit better. He's also in deficit, but less than 50%. They need 100%, and they can find 60%. They can find 70%. They can find 80%, 90%, but not 100%. And those are treated differently. I will read, inshallah, shortly. We'll read a section from Reliance of the Traveler that indicate how we pay zakah to these two categories. Under the faqir, there are 5 scenarios. There are 5 subcategories. Under the miskin, there are subcategories. The third category is called zakah workers. Zakah workers, this is the department of zakah. This is like the ministry of zakah. And the eye of the ministry of zakah is always on society, is always on people. They have agents and they have workers who are experts in their field. They know what's going on. And some of the zakah workers are agents dispatched by the imam or by the governor or by the government. Al-mu'allafa qulubuhum, those whose hearts are to be reconciled. In the Shafi'i school, there are 4 subcategories in this category, and all of them are Muslims. Zakah is for Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ, when he sent Muaz to Yemen, he told him that tells him that there is zakah that will be taken from تؤخذ من أغنيائهم وترد على فقرائهم. It's taken from their wealthy people and returned to their poor people, i.e., Muslims. The 5th category are those that are in the process of purchasing their freedom. Some of these categories do not exist today, but they may come into existence. There is a human trafficking everywhere now, and it seems to be on the increase in some parts of the world. So to help people who are Muslims to purchase and get rid of this ugly situation is maybe can fall under this. One will have to check with their local imam. Al-Gharimun, those in debt. We will examine 3 subcategories. Fi sabilillah. And notice here, fi sabilillah was not put at the end. It was put number 7. Had fi sabilillah being put at the end, one could think that fi sabilillah in the way of Allah may encompass all aspects of goodness, including Ibn Sabil, including travelers who are in need of money. No, it's placed number 7 in the ayah, and that's why the ulama understood that this refers to a particular layer of society, not all aspects of goodness. Since we talk about tamlik, there's a transfer of ownership. Transfer of ownership can only happen between people, not between fictitious entities. So a mosque cannot own anything. A school doesn't own. Hospital doesn't own. Who can own? People, you and me. We can own something. Zakah can only be given to people who we can have a transfer of ownership towards them, not anyone else. So if they don't fit this category, there are other ways to help schools and hospitals and mosques. There are other ways. For example, zakah is for Muslims only. What about non-Muslims? I may have a relative who is non-Muslim. I may have a friend. There are other ways to help non-Muslims. The Sharia did not forget about anyone. But zakah is very specific. So it's placed in number 7, fi sabilillah. And number 8 is Ibn Sabil. Ibn Sabil, travelers needing money. Can you think of what layers of society these 8 categories affect? Remember, life is very dynamic. Life is not static. I may be wealthy today, I may be poor tomorrow. I may be on vacation in Indonesia today, and then a tsunami takes place, and all my wealth, my family gets affected. I may have a business somewhere, and then an earthquake takes place, and all of a sudden I lose my business, and I become poor. I become from the first category or the second category. I may have a business, and then some calamity takes place. Maybe a fire, maybe it gets destroyed, and so on and so forth. I may be wealthy, and then a war takes place near me, and I get displaced from my area, and I become a refugee. I'm poor now. I may be in an area where an earthquake takes place, or a hurricane, or a typhoon, or any of the like. So Fakir encompasses all these people, all these layers of society that gets affected. In many parts of the world, like in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in many places, in Yemen, Afghanistan, everywhere in society, people were living a good life, and all of a sudden there is a civil war or there is a war, and they had to be displaced. And they lost access to their property, they lost access to their money, and they become homeless overnight. Zakat takes care of them. If each and every one of us who are eligible to pay zakah pays their zakah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not make zakah as a second pillar of Islam for nothing. Miskin is someone who is short of money. He's always in deficit, they're always in deficit, but their deficit is not major. It's 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, but no more than 50%. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says about people in Surah Al-Kahf, أَمَّا السَّفِينَةُ فَكَانَتْ لِمَسَاكِينَ يَعْمَلُونَ فِي الْبَحْرِ. As for the ship, it belonged to masakin, miskin, that used to work in the sea. They're miskins and they own the ship. They have a ship as their property, but they were still called miskin. Miskin also affects layers of society that can find work but are not able to find work that suits them. Fakir, the poor people, are people who maybe they're not able to find work, or they got into an accident and they can no longer work, or like the veterans of wars, they've lost their limbs and they can no longer work. Poor are the categories of people that either don't have any money or cannot find a job, or they're not suitable for a job, or they ran into a situation where um, they cannot work they can no longer work because of physical handicap or whatever, or disabilities. A miskin, on the other hand, they can find work, but not the work that will allow them to be self-sufficient. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu used to say, إِذَا أَعْطَيْتُمُوهُمْ فَأَغْنُوهُم. When you give zakah, fulfill their needs and give them sufficiency. Make them cross the level of sufficiency and make them wealthy. Zakah is not to be given as drop by drop. If the zakah funds is abundant, zakah is to fulfill the needs of these people, and we will see how. Al-Gharimun alayha, those are three categories, three subcategories. Let's go and take a look into some of them. Who is al-faqir? Number one, al-faqir is someone who has la mala lahu wa la kasba lahu. Under these two words, we have 5 scenarios. We will not mention the 5 scenarios, but I'll mention them in general. لا مال له ولا كسب له يقع موقعا من كفايته. They're always in deficit. Their income and their property is always less than 50% of what they need. And their deficit is always more than 50% of what they need. And what they have is less than 50% of what they need. And these categories do not have enough to suffice themselves, and they're unable to earn their living by work suitable to them. Maybe they used to be in a good shape, then all of a sudden they got into an accident and they can no longer work. Or they used to work as a manager in a corporation, and now they lost their job and they can no longer work. But they can find a work as a taxi driver. The Sharia will tell them you don't have to do that. If you cannot find a job suitable for you, zakah will take care of you. Or is able to earn his living, but to do so would keep him too busy to engage in attaining knowledge of sacred law, i.e., this affects students of sacred law, students of knowledge, students studying Sharia. The ulama of fiqh, they put a condition that these students must be excelling, i.e., يرجى منهم الفتية. It's expected and hoped that these students would excel and become great scholars. These students can be supported by zakah. The miskin are people who are short of funds, short of money. They're in deficit, they have property, and they have a job maybe, and it's they have less than what they need, and they're also unable to earn their living by work suitable to them. Or is able to earn their living, but to do so would keep them also busy to engage in attaining knowledge of sacred law. Some of the scenarios are similar between the faqir and the miskin. The difference is the deficit. And the difference is the miskin is not someone who has physical disabilities, for example. Someone who's was hit by a rocket or by a bomb somewhere and can't work anymore. Miskin is someone who can work and is eager to find a job and fulfill his needs and the needs of people that depend on him. But maybe is in need of investment. Maybe is in need of help. Maybe he's a carpenter and he needs to expand his tools so that he can take on more projects. Or maybe he's a jewelry, someone who can make jewelry, but he needs help. Or someone who has a production studios, but they need more help. This affects all people who want to start a business or want to improve their situations, and also affects investors, because investors can invest in them, and the Department of Zakah is always looking for investors who wants to pay their Zakah, so that their Zakah can be used to invest in those people, because they're miskin, they're not fakir. They're experts in their field, but they need help. Maybe someone, well, we'll talk about it when we read the section from Umdatul Salik. Al-Amiluna alayha, this is the Department of Zakah workers, and agents dispatched by the Imam, and they receive a salary. These people receive a salary. They don't have to be poor. They may be wealthy, but they're workers. An accountant, we need to pay the accountant. We need to pay the collector. We need to pay these people. And these people are paid either from the Treasury, from the Ministry of Finance, or if the Ministry of Finance does not pay them, then they're paid from Zakah. So منهم الساعي والكاتب والحارس والقاسم, and they take a salary. Number 4, المؤلفة قلوبهم. There are four subcategories under this. So this includes recent converts to Islam that are alienated from their kin. قريبي العهد بالإسلام. This is amazing, because people will see that Muslims care for each other. And recent converts to Islam don't have to face all the difficulties that they face with their family or with their friends, and so on and so forth. There are funds that can assist them as in their journey. Or it also encompasses chief personage of people whose Islam may be expected to improve, i.e., their intention is weak. Their Islamic intentions are weak. But they're leaders in their community, and it's expected that their Islam would improve. Or whose peers may be expected to enter Islam. But Zakah is only paid to Muslims, not to non-Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ paid Safwan ibn Umayyah after one battle. He paid him, and that person used to hate the Prophet ﷺ. Used to hate him to the core, to the bone. The Prophet gave him, and then he gave him, and then he gave him. And the same guy says, he gave me while he was the most hated person to me. And he kept on giving me until he became the most dearest person to me. So non-Muslims can be given and can be, and he was still a non-Muslim at the time, Safwan ibn Umayyah. They can be given, but not from Zakah. وفي رقاب. Now we come to the fee category. The fee is ظرف. وهم المكاتبون. So people, slaves who are purchasing their freedom, they're helped. So they are given enough to do so, if they do not have the means. But this amount can be taken back from them. So i.e., let's say the slave who's trying to purchase their freedom change their mind. Let's say they change their mind, say, I don't want to do it anymore. I'm happy where I am. Or their master say, you are free for the sake of Allah. You don't need to pay me anything. Then whatever amount is given to them can be taken back and put back in the Department of Zakah funds. So the first 4 is transfer of ownership complete. The last 4 is a transfer of ownership that's qualified. So it remains with them as long as they need it. Al-Gharimun, those in debt. This encompasses 3 categories, 3 types of people. A person X, for example, who incurs a debt to settle trouble between two parties, between two families, between two people, between two regions. You know, we live, alhamdulillah, here in North America, but there are many places where you have mafia, you have gangsters, you have family entrenched system, or you have tribal system where a problem can happen between two tribes or two people or two families or two parties that may involve bloodshed even, or concerning property, their fight over property. So if you incur debt to settle trouble, say, I'll take care of it. You get financial compensation from the Department of Zakah. Or you take a loan, you incur debt to support yourself or your dependents. The Department of Zakah will also assist you. Or as a guarantor. You're X and there's Y and Z. And you guarantee to Z that Y will pay Z. You say, I will guarantee him. He will pay you back. And if he doesn't pay you back, I will pay you. So you incur a guarantee now. And you may incur a debt because you have to take a debt to pay back Z in the case neither you nor Y can pay him. In all of these three scenarios, and this is to encourage people to do good in society. So you don't say it's not my problem. When you see two people are about to fight and shed blood and cause trouble, you say, I'll take care of it. Don't worry. Why? Because in Islam, there's a system that will assist you when you incur a debt for something good. And in this case also, you don't have to be poor. You can be wealthy as well. Fi sabilillah, this is reserved for volunteer soldiers for whom no salary has been allotted in the army roster. So they're giving from zakah, and this also can be taken back. So after the mission is finished or after the war is finished, they can return back their weapons or their clothes or whatever they're given. The last one is Ibn Sabil. Ibn Sabil could encompass many layers of society. It could encompass students. It could encompass business travelers. It could encompass a person that wants to go on vacation in halal, but does not have the mean, and they're so stressed out. Or a traveler, either passing amongst us, and then something happens and he has no access to his money anymore and to his property. Or someone who wants to take on a journey that is undertaken for the purpose, not for the purpose of disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How much the poor and miskin are given. Let's read this section from Reliance of the Traveler. And the Shaykh considered two scenarios. One scenario where zakah funds are abundant. And the second scenario is not much zakah funds are available. He says, Section H 8.12 قال ويعطى الفقير والمسكين ما يزيل حاجتهما. A person who is poor or short of money is given as much as needed of tools and materials, i.e., if he has a trade, if he has a profession, such as the tools of a carpenter. The tools of the students is his books. Students' tools are their books. Carpenter have their own tools. Dentists have their own tools. Jewelry maker have their own tools. Each profession have their own tools. Here, Brother Harun and Brother Naim, they have their own tools, cameras and production system. Each profession requires certain tools in order for them to perform their job and in order for them to earn a living that will يزيل حاجتهما as much as they need in order to remove their dependency on others from now until they die. When we talk about zakah, we're not talking about now, we're talking about life expectancy. That throughout my life expectancy, what is my deficit? Is it less than 50%? Is it more than 50%? Is it none? If it's none, I'm in good shape. If it's less than 50%, I'm miskin. If it's more than 50%, I am fakir. Either way, a person who is poor or short of money, whether fakir or miskin, is given as much as needed of tools and materials with which he can earn a living and live a decent life. We don't give people drop by drop zakah. We want them to live decent lives. And in the Shafi'i school, the Shafi'i scholars, they want each and every person to be a positive element in society and not be a recipient of zakah, but rather be a giver of zakah. We want to transform their situations from being recipients to being a giver. So he said, if they have a trade with which they can earn a living, or property with which he can engage in trade, i.e., if a merchant, each according to the demands of their profession. This amount varies. It varies from whether you live in metropolitan city or whether you live in the country, in villages. In villages, to rent a store is cheaper than to rent it in San Francisco. Each according to the demands of their profession. This amount varies depending on whether, for example, one is a jeweler, a clothier, a grocer, or others, or a dentist, or a carpenter, or a jewelry maker. We give them enough to start their business, i.e., we invest in them. But this investment from the Department of Zakah is called transfer of ownership. We don't take it back. And we encourage other investors to invest in them. If the recipient has no trade, i.e., let's say someone is poor and faced a calamity in life, he had an accident, and as a result of an accident, he was in coma for a few months, and then he woke up and he cannot work. They cannot work anymore. What do? You give them enough that will be sufficient for them until they die, throughout their life expectancy. Assuming zakah is available, the abundant zakah funds are available. Or you buy a building for them or a house and you rent it, and the income from that house will suffice to fulfill all their expenses up until they die. If the recipient has no trade, i.e., is unable to do any work, whether for wages, by trading, or other, then he is given enough zakat to fulfill his needs from the present till the end of his probable life expectancy. Let's say life expectancy is 60 years in some areas. We give them up until 60 years because they can no longer work. Based on the average lifespan for someone like them. So women live more than men, men live less than women. Women in certain regions may live less or more than other men in other regions. وهذا مفروض مع كثرة الزكاة. These measures are obligatory when abundant zakah funds are available. If abundant zakah funds are available, we want to alleviate poverty and maskana and make these people transform from being recipients of zakah to give it, to be of those who give zakah. whether the imam distributes them or a property owner. But if there is not much zakah available, like today, hopefully our community will mature, and 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 hopefully also our Muslim brothers and sisters will learn more about zakah and realize how important is to make this institution work to its fullest and its best way possible. If if there is not much zakah available, meaning if the owner or imam distributes funds that are too little to last the poor person for his probable life expectancy or for even 1 year, it is distributed as is and aids to each category. Yeah, in the Shafi'i school, they also try to encompass the 8 category. There are some categories that are non-applicable today. So those categories um, um, are, since it's non-applicable, we try to give to all the categories that are applicable. And if there is enough funds available, we give to each person in each category. And if there is not enough funds available, at least to 3 people in each category. Because 3 people requires, it means a plural, it means a category. In fatwa, sometimes they give to 1 person only. In fatwa. But the default position is each and every person, if one can, or at least 3. This is a dilemma because today, our wealthy people face a dilemma. They want to give zakah, but sometimes they don't know who is poor and who's not. They don't know the 8 recipients of zakah, the 8 categories. They don't know what's going on in society. And they also face another dilemma, whether can I give it to this organization or that organization or to this masjid or that masjid. And sometimes they may be facing a dilemma. Can I trust them or can I not trust them? And I don't have time to do my homework. There's a dilemma. And there's a dilemma also that recipients of zakah are facing, because some of them are in need of zakah, but they don't express their needs. And those who are asking for zakah, maybe those who do not ask are more needy than those who ask. So it requires our community to be vigilant and to be to understand the conditions of its members. So the 8 categories actually affect all these people. Category number 1 affect people who have been impacted by disastrous or by act of God or by natural disasters. Could be hurricane, could be an earthquake, could be a war, could be whatever, and they need assistance. The second category, it involves more those who can work, but they need a push, and they need either better employment. So the Department of Zakah will always be in contact with the Ministry of Labor and Employment to find out what other employments are available for those people, or investment. The third category are the Zakah workers. This is the public sector. This is a part of the public sector. The fourth category talks about al-mu'allafa qulubuhum. So these are recent converts to Islam or other people. This impacts integration in society. How do we integrate newcomers into our community? And how do we adapt? Category number 5, it helps slaves to purchase their freedom, and as Islam promotes freedom and equality. Category number 6, it's about social insurance and to mend relationships between layers of society when people take debt to settle trouble between parties or between people or between families. Number 7, fi sabilillah, it affects national security. and defending the faith and the land. And number 8, it affects the sector of travel and tourism, because these people that maybe are ibn sabil, the travelers in need, maybe tourists, maybe business travelers, maybe students. It affects the business world, it affects tourism sector. So, category 1 and 2 also affects students and education. So if we were to modernize how Department of Zakah would work in the modern time, it might look something like this. The Department of Zakah, they have their own workers, they have their own mission, but they're in contact with all of these departments and all of these categories. They're in contact with the business world. They're in contact with the Department of Education. They're in contact with the Department of Human Resources, Department of Defense, investment firms or investment people, angel investors or VCs, to use modern terms, as long as they're not involved in unlawful things. The Department of Treasury, the Department of Labor and Employment, the Department of Tourism. These 8 categories include all of these, includes members of society that belong to all of these areas. Okay. We finished the first part. The second part is we go into the some of the mechanics or the detailed rulings of zakah. As we mentioned before, zakah can be on property or can be on people, on persons. So zakah on property, it involves 5 or 6 areas. Zakah is only restricted on livestock, on crops, on gold and silver, and by extension money, on business, i.e. trade goods, and then on mines and treasure troves. Notice 3 of these, they are connected with the land. So the crops come from the land. Mines is under the ground. Treasure troves could be under the ground or under the sea. They're buried. Livestock is not underground. Gold and silver and trading goods. And when we talk about hawl, remember we mentioned that there's something called nisab. Nisab is the zakah payable amount, is the minimum or the threshold that as your property increases, once you cross this threshold, this is called nisab. Once you reach the nisab, zakah becomes obligatory. And nisab is called the sabab, is a cause. Zakah is obligatory, but when is it due? It's due after 1 year. So the expiry, when 1 year transpires, this is called a condition. For example, sunset is a cause for the Maghrib prayer. Wudu is a condition to be able to pray in a valid way. So once sunset arrives, Maghrib prayer becomes obligatory. But it can only be performed after you make your wudu and face the qibla and so on and so forth. When we talk about zakah, there is a cause, there is a condition, and there is an impediment. In some schools, a debt may impede zakah, may impede the payment of zakah. So when the cause is there, i.e. nisab is there, zakah is obligatory. When is it due? Is it due at that time? No, it's not due at that time. It's due once a year has transpired. So the zakah is due provided a year has transpired. I.e., hawl is a condition. Nisab is a cause or ratio legis. We will see that hawl is not needed for crops or for mines and treasure troves. Hawl is only needed for one, livestock, gold and silver, number three, and trade goods, business. That's when you need a year. You need the zakah fiscal year. Fiscal Hijri lunar year, 354 days and 8 hours. We're not going to talk about livestock too much because not many of us have farms. And in the Shafi'i school, zakah is due on livestock if it's left on their own, i.e., if it's sa'ima, as is mentioned in the hadith. But if you incur expenses to feed them, then zakah is no longer due. It's only due when you don't incur expenses. We will not talk about mines and treasure troves too much because it's not every day that we're going to find a treasure in the backyard of our homes. And maybe we are not mine owners. Those who are mine owners and they want to ask questions, ahlan wa sahlan, tfaddal. We'll talk a little bit about crops because similarly, not many of us own fields of crops. We'll focus on gold and silver and money and trade goods. What does it mean to be in business? Let's say if I inherit a business from my father, am I a businessman? Or somebody gift me a business, am I a businessman? Or are there additional conditions to be in business? What does it mean to be in business? I bought 10 shirts. Am I in business or am I not in business? Maybe I bought these 10 shirts to wear them or to collect them. I like to collect shirts. Or maybe I bought these 10 shirts with the intention to resell them. So there are two conditions that must be fulfilled for someone to be considered a businessman or a businesswoman. So on livestock, zakah is only due on camels, cattle, and sheep and goats. Camels are known. Cattle is cows and the like, buffalo and the like. And sheep include goats. So on sheep and goats, these are the numbers for zakah. Once you have 40 sheep, you pay 2.5%. But then the formula changes. The next one is due when you have 121. Then it's due when you have 201. And then when you reach 400, the formula stabilizes. Each 100, you pay a shat. You pay a sheep. In terms of cows, the formula stabilizes after you reach 60. So every additional 10, it becomes a linear combination of 30 and 40. And for camels, the formula is a bit more involved. It goes from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 to 25, 36, 46, 61, 76, 91, 121, 130. Once it reaches 130, the formula stabilizes, and now it becomes a linear combination of 40 and 50. I.e., 130 is 2 times 40 plus 1 times 50. 140 is 1 times 40 plus 2 times 50. And every 10, it's a linear combination of 40 and 50. For cows, it's a linear combination of 30 and 40. So the formula stabilizes in cows when you reach 60, and in camels when you reach 130, and in sheep and goats when you reach 400. Then every 100, you pay an additional sheep. or an additional goat. The age is of importance. In terms of sheep and goats, for sheep it's 1+ year old, and for goats it's 2+ year old. And for cows we have 1 year and 2 year. And for camels we have 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and 4 years old. There are details when we talk about zakah and livestock. Those who are interested, I invite them to read any book of fiqh because they're pretty similar, whether from the Shafi'i school or other schools. But you can see how the ulama think, or how the Sharia determines the amount of zakah that is due, and what is the nisab, the zakah payable amount or zakah payable number where you have to pay zakah on. Although we don't encounter this every day, it's good to see how it works, to be able to wire our mind in an Islamic way. The next one, the condition for zakatul mawashi is to be sa'ima. في سائمة الغنم في كل 40 شاة شاة. So these mawashi, these livestock, they graze on open pasturage. Zakah on crops. Zakah on crops, only two categories are involved: grains and fruits, but not every fruit. In the Shafi'i school, only raw dates and grapes. Grapes when they become raisins, raw dates when they become cured dates. In some other schools, like the Maliki you heard yesterday, there are some oils involved, and olives. But when you pay zakah, you pay it from oil, not from olives. In the Shafi'i, is only dates and grapes. So these are non-perishable items that can be stored and can be considered staple for some people. And the first category is grains and legumes. So only on the staple types that people cultivate, dry, and store, i.e., for example, wheat, barley, rice, lentils, chickpeas, white beans, San'ani wheat, and all these kinds of corn in some places. Whatever is considered staple. In some areas, barley and wheat is considered staple. In the Far East, rice is, you can't live without rice. And in Spanish-speaking countries or Portuguese-speaking countries, corn is essential. Can't live without corn. Tortilla is everywhere. There is no zakah on other types of food, like seasonings, like parsley and pepper and salt. And here, hawl is not necessary. Zakah is due as soon as one possesses the nisab. The nisab is determined in terms of wasaq, and to determine what wasaq is in today's measurements, there might be some difference in how you estimate the wasaq. In the Shafi'i school, they estimated it to be around 609 kilograms of net dried weight, free of husks and chaff. However, some grains must be stored with their husks or in their kernel. In this case, the nisab is double the amount. It's 1,219 kilograms. So if you have a field, if you have a garden that produces 609 kilograms of wheat, and maybe this is about $500 maybe, or $400, depending on how the cost of a kilo of wheat and corn and barley, then you must pay zakah. And zakah on this is 10%. Zakah on gold and silver and money. For zakah on gold and silver, a full lunar year is necessary. And in the Shafi'i school, people ask, can I pay zakah in Ramadan? Can I pay zakah in Muharram? Can I pay zakah It's not up to us as to when we can pay zakah, because the beginning of the year is determined the moment our property reaches the nisab. Once the property reaches the nisab, our year began. And a year later, we must pay, and we cannot delay payment. It's unlawful to delay payment without an excuse. You could have an excuse that you're looking for people to pay them, but if there is no excuse, it's unlawful. And it's not up to me to determine the beginning of the year or the end of the year. The beginning of the year is determined by when my property reaches the nisab. And then I have to count 1 year. What happens if my property dips below the nisab? When the property dips below the nisab, the year is interrupted. And when the year is interrupted, you have to wait until your property reaches the nisab once again. When the property reaches the nisab once again, you begin a new year. That's when the year now starts, because the previous year was interrupted. So in the Shafi'i school, you start with something over the nisab, and you must maintain that up until the end of the year. Your property maintains the value over the nisab. So if you start with something over the nisab and you never dip below the nisab, 12 months later, 12 lunar months later, you must pay zakah. And 2.5% must be paid on all money, as it mentions here in the slide. 2.5% must be paid on all money exceeding nisab that has been saved for a year, without dipping below the nisab. Once it dips below the nisab, the year is interrupted, the year is broken, and you need to start a new year. The gold nisab is 20 dinars. The silver nisab is 200 dirhams. At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, 20 dinars equal in value 200 dirhams. And the exchange rate was 10 to 1. 10 dirhams equal 1 dinar. And then the value of gold and silver relative to each other changed over time. And historically, gold has always been more expensive than silver, except in the 15th, 16th, or 17th century, where silver became rare, and silver became more expensive than gold. In any case, the gold nisab is 20 dinars, or in today's measurement, it's around 85 grams of pure gold. So 24K. So if you have gold that is 12K, then you need double the amount. The pure gold is 85 grams and double the amount of 12K gold. Silver nisab is the same, 200 dirhams, or around 595 grams of pure silver. And zakah is exacted proportionally on any amount over these minimums, whether the gold is in coins or ingots or jewelry prepared for unlawful or offensive usage. In the Shafi'i school, the only exception is for women who use jewelry in a lawful way. They don't have to pay zakah on it. Because once gold becomes a jewelry, it becomes a merchandise. It becomes a trade good. And for women, this is her tools. Women cannot live without jewelry. In some areas, in other areas, women cannot live without bags or without makeup or that's their tools. The carpenter has his tools, women have their tools, students have their tools, everyone has their tools, scholars have their tools. Coins, ingot, jewelry prepared for unlawful or offensive usage. Or articles which are permanent acquisition, like I'm in the habit of collecting gold, then zakah is due on them. As you know, in Islam, men cannot wear gold as a jewelry. So when we talk about gold that are worn for halal usage, as in the slide here, لا زكاة في حلي معد لاستعمال مباح. There is no zakah on jewelry that is for permissible use. Permissible use implies that a woman is not wearing the jewelry to show off. If she's wearing the jewelry to show off, then she has to pay zakah on it. If she's wearing the jewelry to look down on other people, she has to pay zakah on it. But if she wears jewelry uh, um, in a permissible way, then she's exempted from paying zakah on a jewelry that is suitable for her standing in society. Some people collect jewelry, because they want the jewelry to store value. Because gold and silver were created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the basis for money. So it's a reference for money. You measure money and you refer them to gold and silver. And they can store value. So some people collect jewelry because it's like savings. If that's the purpose, then zakah is due on them. But if jewelry that are collected or that are bought for permissible use, that's the only exception. Zakah on trade goods. So what does it mean to be a businessman? Zakah on trade goods is like zakah on money. It's like zakah on gold and silver. You pay 2.5% at the end of the year. So you need a year, a full lunar year, a full fiscal year for business. But you don't have to start with Nisab. With money, when your money reaches an amount above the Nisab, that's when you begin the year. In trade goods, when you begin a business, you begin the year. You may start a business with buying only 10 shirts or 5 shirts to start a business, way below the Nisab. Your fiscal year has started. As soon as you made the intention to have this business. At the end of the year, the Nisab comes in effect at the end of the year. At the end of the year, I appraise my business, I appraise the trade goods, and if their value, their market value is over the Nisab, that's when I pay zakah. I pay 2.5%, must be paid on all trade goods that have been possessed for a year, whose value equals or exceeds the zakah minimum at the end of the year, not at the beginning. Provided you're a businessman. What does a businessman mean? It means that the trade goods have been acquired through a transaction of muawada, a transaction of exchange. Whether the exchange is potential or actual. Let's say I give you a gift. When I give you a gift, this is not an exchange. But if I give you a gift and there's an unwritten agreement between you and me that I expect something in return, this is a transaction of muawada. There is an exchange here. It's a potential exchange. So if you acquire trade goods through a transaction, not because you inherited them from your father. Let's say our parents passed away and I inherit the business from them. But I'm an engineer, or I'm a teacher, or I'm a scholar, or I'm a carpenter. I don't know anything about business. Am I a businessman? No, you're not a businessman. 2 conditions have to be fulfilled. Number 1, the trade goods have been acquired through a transaction of muawada, potential or actual. And that at the time of acquisition, the owner intended to use the goods for trade, i.e., to resell them. So let's say I inherit a business from my father. I'm not a businessman. If I decide to continue his business, I am now a businessman. I need to make the intention. Once I make the intention, the year has started. So zakah for trade goods, number 3, is considered to have begun at the beginning of the money zakah year if the trade goods cost nisab or more. Okay, when do the beginning of the year, do I refer to money or do I refer to business full year? He said, if you didn't have any money or you started your business with less money than your nisab, the beginning of the year is from the moment of purchase if the cost is below the nisab. And they were bought either with less money than nisab or bought for non-monetary goods. If, however, I have money in the bank, I have $100,000, and then I decided to use 50,000 to begin a business, I already have a year in progress. And I just transformed my money into business. So my year is not interrupted. The beginning of my year is the beginning of the money year, the gold and silver year, even though I'm now a businessman. At the end of the year, I look at the cash and I look at the trade goods and I assess what is the amount of property or the value of property that I have. Let's try to finish this quickly. So it is not a condition that the value of the trade goods amount to nisab except at the end of the year. Zakah on mines and treasure troves, zakah of 2.5% must be paid immediately on gold and silver that is above the nisab if extracted from a mine located on a land permissible to work or owned by the owner. And if it's a treasure trove buried in pre-Islamic times, not post-Islamic time, if you find a treasure buried from before Islam, 20% is due on that treasure trove. Of course, if it amounts to the zakah minimum and the land is not owned. Otherwise, if found on an owned land, it belongs to the owner. Or otherwise, it is considered as a lost and found item. Zakatul Fitr is obligatory on every free Muslim, provided that they have necessary amount, i.e. a meal, and that is in excess of what one needs to feed themselves, and those one is obliged to support, what one needs to clothe them, and in excess of one's debts and housing expenses. Zakatul Fitr becomes obligatory when the sun sets on the night before Eid. I.e., if you're alive a moment before sunset and alive a moment after sunset, there's zakat due on you. I.e., if you experience both a portion of Ramadan and a portion of Eid, zakah is due. If your wife gives birth to a child after sunset, there is no zakatul fitr on this child. If the child is born before sunset and remains alive till after sunset, there is zakatul fitr on this child. Zakatul fitr is due on persons, on your body, and it acts like sujud al-sahu. When we do a prayer, sometimes we make mistakes in our prayer, sometimes we think about other things in the prayer, sometimes we make mistakes. And sujud al-sahu, the prostration of forgetfulness, mend our prayer and compensate for the shortcomings in our prayer. Zakatul Fitr compensates for the shortcoming in our fasting. So inshallah, I will stop here for a few moments and then we'll take questions and answers. Before we take the questions and answers, I will talk about zakatable assets, some examples, and then we'll answer the questions as they come. All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So we are now in part number 3, the Q&A period. Before we begin the Q&A, um, as you noticed, Zakah is on property and only on 5 types of property. So for example, Zakah is not obligatory on the car I drive. The car I drive is non-zakatable. The house I live in is non-zakatable. If it's a house I own and I live in, house I live in is non-zakatable. And owning a house does not make me wealthy. I could be poor and I own a house. And if I own a house and I'm poor, i.e., I cannot find a job, or my deficit is always more than 50%, the Sharia will not ask the person to sell their house in order to fulfill their needs. But they're considered poor and they're given from Zakah even if they own a house or a car. Let's go through the questions and then I'll mention a few zakatable items or non-zakatable items. Rental property, for example, is not subject to Zakah. But the income that you earn from the rental property may be subject to Zakah when it reaches the Nisab. Question number 1. Zakah is obligatory, but its percentage is not given in the Holy Quran. Where does this number come from? Additionally, where is it written that it must be on the excess of the Nisab amount and held for 1 full year? In the Quran and Sunnah work hand in hand. The Prophet ﷺ was sent to لِيُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ, to clarify to people the teachings of the Quran. In most scenarios, the Quran established the fundamental rules and the details were left to the Prophet ﷺ to expound on. In few circumstances, very specific circumstances, the Prophet talked in general and the Quran detailed, like the laws of inheritance. The laws of inheritance were detailed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. But prayer, for example, was just mentioned in the Quran, aqimu salah, establish the prayer. Atu zakah, give zakah. The details of how to pray, the details of how to give zakah was established by the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet demonstrated to us how to pray, demonstrated to us how to perform Hajj, demonstrated to us how to pay zakah. And this practice continued after he passed away. And Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali and all the Khalif after them, all the leaders, they used to instruct their people in the same way the Prophet ﷺ instructed the companions on how to pay zakah. Question number 2. Is there a preferred time of the Islamic year that one should give their zakah? We have poor and needy people. The 8 categories exist throughout the year. They do not exist only on the first day of Ramadan and then they disappear. They do not exist in Muharram and then they disappear. We have poor and needy, and the other 6 categories, whatever categories is still available today, these categories exist every day. They exist every month. They exist throughout the year. So there is no preferred time of the Islamic year that one should give the zakah, because it's not up to me as to when I must give my zakah. The year begins when I reach the Nisab. It's not up to me to decide when the year starts. The Nisab determines this. It's not up to me to determine when the year ends. Once the year ends, zakah is obligatory and must be given. I must get it out of my system. It's not my money anymore. It's their money in my pocket. And if I lose it, I'm a guarantor. I have to pay it back to them. If it gets stolen from me, I have to pay it to them. It's not my money. If I delay it without an excuse, I have to pay it back to them. But if I delay because I'm looking for people who fulfill the categories, I have an excuse, a legal excuse, a Shari'i excuse. So the question is there a preferred time? There is no preferred time. When it's due, this is the preferred time. When it's due, this is the optimal time to pay it, because delaying from that time is actually a sin if one does not have an excuse. Question number 3. If I live on a monthly salary and possess no savings, do I owe zakah? This question is a bit general. You owe zakah if you have more than the nisab, and you're able to maintain that nisab throughout the year up until the end of the year without the amount that you owe, that you possess, dips below the nisab. Then you pay zakah. And you may pay zakah, and you may be also eligible to receive zakah. It doesn't mean that if you pay zakah, you're not eligible to receive zakah. Because depending on your deficit. If your deficit is more than 50% or less than 50%. The question, the way it's formulated, requires more information to answer it properly. But in general, this is the answer. Does the miskin have to possess less than nisab to become zakah eligible? No. You may pay zakah, you may receive zakah. You may receive zakah higher than the zakah you pay. Question number 5. Can paying off the debt of someone who is deceased be considered giving zakah? Zakah is tamlik, transfer of ownership. You transfer the ownership to a person, they do whatever they want with it. But if someone has already deceased, paying their debt on their behalf is not considered zakah. Can paying off the debt of someone who is deceased be considered giving zakah? If the loan is not paid off, a widow and son will lose their primary residence. Okay, this is a particular scenario. For specific scenarios, I would recommend that you consult your local imam, who will probably ask you more questions and be able to provide you a more tailored answer toward the question you're asking. Or we can communicate privately, and then we can see how we can address this question in the most suitable way, inshallah. Number 6. Should business owners pay zakah on accounts payable that haven't been paid yet? Zakah is on what you have under your hand. If you remember, in the beginning of zakah, we mentioned when you possess. Possession means complete possession. Possession means that it is under your control and you can dispose of. If you haven't paid yet anything to anyone, it's still your money. If you don't want to pay zakah on it, you should have paid it before zakah was due. If it's in your pocket, if it's in your account, and you have full possession of it and you have full access to it, then zakah is due on it. And if you have debt, debts do not remove the obligation of zakah in the Shafi'i school. If I have $20,000 and I have a debt of $10,000, being in debt for $10,000 does not remove the obligation of zakah, and I do not subtract my debt from the amount that I owe or the amount that I have. If one overpays or underpays zakah, how can this be rectified? If you underpay zakah, you estimate how much more you need to pay, and you pay it. And if you overpay zakah, you pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that it's accepted, and inshallah, next time you will calculate your zakah in a better way. Do a husband and wife calculate their zakah based on their joint income? Zakah is paid individually. So let's say two people are involved in business, and they are business partners, 60-40 or 50-50. Can they pay zakah jointly? Yes, they can, provided they have no other incomes. Because sometimes we have business partners who have other sources of income. But let's say they don't have any other income, then zakah can be paid jointly if they're business partners, or they have livestock that are mixed together, and if they fulfill certain conditions, they can pay jointly. But you have to pay attention to the conditions associated with this. So in this case, do a husband and wife calculate their zakah based on their joint income? If they have no other sources of income from anywhere else, neither he nor she, and the joint income is in what percentage? Is it 50-50, 60-40? Then she needs to pay 40%, he needs to pay 60% of the zakah that's owed on this account. And if they pay together, the 40 and 60% is taken care of automatically. I think for something like this, we would also need more information. Is zakah the Islamic equivalent of taxation? Zakah has no relation with taxation. Taxation is taken from the government in order to address the needs of its society, whether they're Muslims or not. And they spend it not on the 8 categories, they spend it on anything they see fit. Zakah is paid only to 8 categories of recipients, and it purifies your money, and it is their money, and it needs to have a transfer of ownership to them, and they decide what to do with it. So giving money to the government, who owns this money? It's public ownership. The whole country owns it. This is not a transfer of ownership. Number 10, if a woman does not wear her jewelry for 1 year, does the zakah become due upon it? That's a good question. Yeah, if this jewelry is reserved to be a jewelry and she wears it on and off from time to time, zakah is not due on it. If, however, the jewelry is meant for as a saving, just to store value, like in some parts of the world, at almost every occasion they buy jewelry, and they keep on accumulating jewelry. So this is for the purpose of collection, then zakah is due on it. In this case, I'll have to look more into whether if one does not wear it for 1 year, whether the ruling still applies. I'll have to get back to you on this. If we have savings in a foreign currency, is the Nisab calculated based on the currency of the country we live in? If we have savings in a foreign currency, is the Nisab calculated based on the currency of the country we live in? The Nisab is calculated based on gold and silver. So how much 85 grams of gold is worth, whether in currency A or currency B, and how much 595 grams of silver is worth, whether in Singaporean dollars or US dollars. Once you have the Nisab amount, whether in any currency, zakah is due. I'm not sure I understand unless there's a story behind the question that one would like to share. How does one pay zakah on business assets, land, and farm products? We talked about business assets. At the end of the year, you assess the merchandise, the trade goods, using the same currency it was bought with. If it was bought in dollars, you assess them in dollars. If it was bought in French franc, you assess them in French franc. If they were bought in lira, you assess them in lira. If they were bought in uh, uh, sterling, you assess them in sterling. And then you assess them also based on their market value at the end of the year. On a land, there is no zakah on land that you own. But if you rent this land, there's zakah on the income. If you want to sell this land and you're in business selling lands, this is a merchandise now. Merchandise can be anything, can be livestock. Maybe you have sheep and you're in the business of selling sheep. So although we did not cover zakah on livestock, if livestock becomes your trade goods, then you consider them as trade goods, as a product, as an item, as an articles. And you assess their value at the end of the year in the same currency they were bought in, according to the market value where you are. If you are a student of knowledge with wealth above the Nisab, do you pay zakah on it? Yes, you do. And you may also receive zakah. Can I pay my zakah monthly and deduct it from the total amount owed? Once zakah becomes obligatory, you can hasten the payment of zakah. I.e., once you own a Nisab, once your property amounts to a value above the Nisab, zakah becomes obligatory. It's due in 1 year. If you decide to pay it ahead of time, it's up to you. You cannot pay it before you own a Nisab because it's not obligatory yet. Remember, Nisab is a cause. 1 full year is a condition. Once you own a Nisab, zakah is obligatory. Once 1 year passes, zakah becomes due. You can pay it ahead of time. It's like you're paying a debt ahead of time. Do large debts like a mortgage or student loans affect how much is owed in zakah? Debts do not remove the obligation of zakah. Is zakah due on diamonds and precious jewels? Zakah is only due on precious metals that are gold and silver. Diamonds is one of the sharpest and most solid material in nature, and because it's solid and it can withstand the test of time, it became the symbol for love. So people buy their fiancé a diamond ring in the hope that the diamond ring, since diamond will last forever, in the hope that their love will last forever. But there is no zakah on diamonds and precious jewels. There is zakah on them in a different way because they're merchandise and you sell them. Once you sell them, there's zakah on them. How do I verify if someone is Muslim in order to give them zakah if it's not apparent? How do I verify? Ask them. I'm not sure what is meant by not apparent. Ask someone, ask a local imam. They'll probably help you more because they probably understand the situation in your region better than we do. Can we give zakah for buildings or repairing a masjid? No, you cannot. Hospitals, schools, if the money goes to specific workers. No. Zakah implies tamlik, a transfer of ownership. If you want to pay zakat to workers, they must fulfill, they must be one of the 8 categories. If they fulfill these conditions, you give them the money, they do whatever they wish with it. Can we give zakah for building or repairing a masjid, hospital, or school if the money goes to specific workers? You can pay zakat to masjid, but not directly. For example, there are situations where zakah will end up in a masjid, but not directly. It's not that you intended that. Let's say a masjid is in trouble, and someone took a loan to settle the trouble. That person becomes category number 6. Wal-gharimin, those in debt. And because they're in debt, the Department of Zakah will assist them. Why? Because they undertook a loan to repair a masjid. The loan they took to repair a masjid or to build a masjid or to help a hospital, to help a school, the Department of Zakah does not interfere in that. It interferes. Do you fulfill the condition that you took a debt to settle trouble? Or first, if you fulfill these conditions, we give you. But zakah cannot be given directly to a masjid because a masjid is not a person that can own. It's a fictitious entity. Is zakah due on 401k? How is it calculated? I think you should listen to what Imam Tahir Anwar said and what Dr. Abdullah Ali said yesterday. They're very much familiar with 401k, way more than I do. But if you talk about RRSP or RESP or stocks or anything, zakah is due on them at the end of the year. You assess the value of these stocks, these items, and you determine how much they're worth, and then you pay it. Can zakah be given in the form of food? If a woman is no longer working, can her husband pay zakah on her behalf? If she cannot pay zakah, her husband does not have to pay zakah on her behalf, and she does not have to ask him to pay zakah on her behalf. Zakah is not due on her. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. All right, inshallah, we will stop here. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد. جزاكم الله خيرا for listening. And we wish you a blessed Ramadan from all of the Zaytuna team here in Berkeley, California. We ask you for your dua, and we ask you also to, if you find it suitable, to assist Zaytuna with whatever you think is good, whether in dua or in any other form. Inshallah, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك اللهم ونتوب إليك.